Hey everybody, this is Bad at Keeping Secrets. I'm Carissa, and today I have Jessica Grose. She is a columnist at the New York Times, opinion writer at the New York Times, and she got my attention because when her book came out, Screaming on the Inside, maybe was it February of this year or January?
December.
Oh,
Yeah.
so it came out right at the end of the year. It was like I read it, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, this was really hard. um, and I think it was sort of illuminating on what we had actually just been through, but had been like pushing back and stuffing. And so I'm so happy that you came or are willing to talk to me about sort of the state of American motherhood at this moment. But I wanted to start out, I typically am kind of fascinated by how people get where they got. And oftentimes it's through early exposure. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about when you knew you wanted to be a writer, or if you did always want to be a writer.
Well, when I was a little kid, I wanted to be an actress.
Mhm.
And I was Charlotte in Charlotte's Web when I was in 5th grade and did a dance of dying. That was very dramatic. And I loved that. I think probably once I was a teenager, I knew that I probably wanted to be a writer. I'm very practical, so I was always concerned about making a living as a writer. And I didn't feel like I knew quite how to do that. I graduated from college in 2004. And even at that time, I could tell that journalism was constricting. Even though I still remember all of them, when you applied for jobs at magazines, the lower tier jobs were always online. It was like print was still like seen as the be all end all. And even at the time, and I'm not always prescient, but here I was just like, yeah, guys, I think the internet's here to stay. So maybe you should invest in that. But even at the time, I knew journalism was constricting. In my early mid 20s, I actually started interviewing for like copywriting, branding jobs, because I was like, I don't think I'm going to make it. I don't think I'm going to get a job that pays my bills. And that was always like, I was never interested in going the starving artist route. I always wanted stability and health insurance. And, I'm hopelessly boring that way. But in my mid 20s, I got a job at Jezebel the first year that it was in existence. And that really cemented me to the career. It was a huge breakthrough. I love my boss, Anna Holmes. I learned so much on that job, and it just gave me exposure to such a bigger group of people reading my writing. And so kind of from there, I just, it was job to job to job. I had a difficult time, which I talk about in the book, when I was pregnant with my older daughter, and I had just gotten a new job. And I realized on my second day of work that I was pregnant, even though my husband and I thought we had stopped trying. It was like I was already pregnant. It was too late. So I got really sick. I had hyperemesis, which means you're just throwing up all day, every day. I ended up having to quit that job when I was 2 months pregnant. And I was convinced that my career was completely over, that no one would ever hire me again, because it just made me seem so irresponsible and unreliable. And so I was freelance for 3 years after my older daughter was born, which was great. Actually really loved both the work-life balance and also the freedom of, writing for a lot of different outlets, stretching myself, writing things that weren't really sort of my main wheelhouse of coverage. It kind of forced me into growing, because it was sort of, I needed to take assignments from whoever paid the best. And I actually think that was really good for me and made me grow. I took a lot of assignments from business magazines because, they were paying well at the time. This is now 10 years ago. Then, when we wanted to have a second child, I needed to go back on staff because I just needed to have a more consistent paycheck. And so I became editor-in-chief of Lenny, which was an email newsletter. And I learned so much about the business side just because we had such a small staff. So that really was an amazing experience. And I think sort of a once in a lifetime moment. And then I started working at the Times in 2018, and I have been here ever since.
Amazing. Thank you for that. There was like, that answered like 4 questions, and I didn't even remember to ask them. But I kind of, you start also in the book with your story about your traumatic first pregnancy. There was something that really caught my attention. So in my pregnancy, I continued taking my SSRIs, but can you talk a little bit about the stigma of taking anti-anxiety medication during pregnancy?
Yeah. So I had decided to go off Prozac to conceive. I had had periods of clinically significant depression and anxiety in my 20s, 2 sort of big moments of, just bad times. And I felt like I had internalized somehow the message that even though I read the studies that showed most people who stay on their meds have fine outcomes, I think I got caught up in the hype about being natural and being on as few medication, and natural, I want to put in air quotes because like, what does that even mean? But being on as few medications as possible to potentially have the best outcome with my child. And I think I felt I had a lot of control over the process, which I subsequently learned that I did not. But I looked to my doctors for guidance. It wasn't just the messages that I was getting from, things that I read or the culture around me that was saying, be on as few medications as possible, eat all organic, all, whatever those messages were. When I looked to doctors for help making this decision, they really just put it back on me. They're like, well, do whatever you think is best. They wouldn't say like, I advise you to do this. They didn't even, because they were not experts in perinatal mental health, they didn't even know the statistics offhand. I still remember my psychiatrist at the time having to open up the DSM-V and like he didn't know, he just didn't know. I don't blame him. That wasn't his specialty. But I just felt like, and I tried to talk to my obstetrician. She didn't care either way. Which, so I felt like I was alone making this decision. I felt like I was making the right decision, the best decision, again, air quotes, whatever that means. And it ended up not working out well for me. And I went back on Prozac when I was 10 weeks pregnant with my older daughter, because I just was so anxious and so depressed. I was non-functional. And whether that was, if I had not had hyperemesis, would that have happened? I don't know. But it's all such a combination that you cannot unpack. You can't disaggregate the physical illness from the mental troubles that I was having at the time. They might all be intertwined. We don't know why any of this happens medically, to be clear. And I think that's part of why it's so hard for mothers to make these decisions, because it's not like, oh, we know that the mechanism for hyperemesis is X. There is some new research showing that there's certain genes that are attached to it, so you can potentially predict whether you might be more likely to have this. But at the same time, we don't know the causal mechanisms. We don't know, not just for moms, we don't know why some people get depressed and anxious in a clinically significant way. It's a combination of genes, it's environment, it's like a whole mess of factors, right? So I felt when I went back on the med that was a failure. Like, I felt like at the time I was failing in absolutely every part of my life. I was not as healthy as I could be for this baby. I had tanked a new job that I felt, I really felt was going to be a major next step in my career. I just felt like roadkill. That was just the image that like occurred to me at the time. I just felt like I was face down in the middle of the road and everybody else was walking over me. And like, it just felt dire. It was probably one of the worst times in my life. And I feel so lucky that I had a supportive family around me and friends who, you know, my husband was amazing. It was a scary time for him too, because he saw what a bad state I was in, and there was nothing that he could do really to help other than, you know, continue to financially support our family, which he did. And he never blamed me or made me feel like there was something wrong with me, which, you know, I've, you know, in my reporting over the years, heard from lots of people who were made to feel like if they were not thrilled every second of their pregnancy or postpartum period, that there was something wrong with them, and, you know, they needed to get their act together. So I don't know if that answers your initial question.
Oh, no.
That's sort of like the full story of going back on the meds. And it took really years, and honestly, the writing of this book, I think, to frame it differently for myself. You know,
Can we talk a little bit? When
oh,
you
no,
say,
no, go on.
So like in the beginning, you talk a lot about our sort of historical, how the concept of motherhood has changed throughout time in America specifically. Could you give us sort of a brief history of how the idea and the concept of motherhood has kind of shifted in the last 100 years?
Sure. So basically up till the Industrial Revolution, everybody was at home. So yes, there were certain ideals of motherhood and being self-sacrificing and all of that. But in terms of the actual hands-on taking care of children, that was a community event, right? Like moms and dads were always in the house. They were responsible for different parts of raising children. And it honestly was just way less hands-on than it is now. I mean, kids as young as 3 were expected to work around the house, work around the farm. Unfortunately,
sorry, I have a 3-year-old and I'm just imagining her working around the farm.
Right. Well, this is depressing, but a lot of them died. It was like you fell in the pond and like no one was there to save you. Like it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was from a modern perspective always great, but that was how it functioned. And so then the Industrial Revolution happens, 19th century, and there starts to be this division of labor. So women are responsible for the domestic sphere, and men go out and have political lives and earn the money. And obviously there were always women that worked, usually minority and immigrant women, poor women always worked. But this was just, you know, we're talking about the ideal and the way that, you know, the expectations were. And so then in the 20th century, you see women increasingly being not accepting of this arrangement. They want to be part of society. They want to earn their own money. This accelerated a lot during World War II. And then, you know, since then there's, you know, more and more women are being educated to the extent that now women outnumber male college grads. But, you know, in the mid-century, there was a lot of push and pull, you know, in the post-war period, really wanted women to be back at home, having babies in the kitchen. And then you see the feminist movement really pushing back against that. And then we've sort of seen this, you know, movement forward on these issues and then pushes back. And we're still seeing so much conversation, argument, mixed feelings about mother's place in society, and those feelings and complicated expectations linger with us to this day.
So I guess that is my natural next question is, what does motherhood and their expectations look like right now? Do you see? Because I mean, you've talked to over 200 women for this book.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's an expectation, and it's not everyone, but many mothers feel just they have to do everything. They have to work outside the home. They have to be great at that. They have to do everything for their children. They have to cook nutritious meals. They have to stay well themselves. They have to stay hot. You have to stay, you know, fit and skinny and looking good, and just having the sort of perfect exterior and interior lives for yourself and your children. Because there's also, I feel like, increasingly this idea that we are responsible for our children's emotional lives. And I think that is just such an impossible task because not everyone feels good all the time. And despite, anyone's best efforts, kids are their own people and they struggle with different things. And no matter how perfectly you parent, whatever that even means, you can't save them from being human. So I think I see that to be increasingly a site of anxiety and unease among parents is feeling responsible for the mental health of their children in ways that, obviously abuse is horrible. And I think we can all agree with that. But in terms of shaping our children's emotional lives, I think there's some pressure to be able to control that more than is reasonable or realistic.
I think it's difficult because I don't know if you feel this way. The sort of shift in value system for me with my child in regards to parenting is having this goal of having a human who feels satisfied, who feels welcome, who feels like they belong, and also is joyous and is happy parts of the time. So it's difficult for me. I think this falls under the category of enmeshment to really separate like my feelings and also my not take it personally when she is upset. Having that goal reframed now that it's unclear to me if she will ever achieve stability, if she will ever have live a long life. Just it's tricky. And it's really difficult decoupling your own expectations with the actions of your child. But something you mentioned a little bit about in the book is the sort of direct conflict, taking care of children or being a quote unquote good mother and being a good boss or employee or worker. Can you talk a little bit about how they're really in direct conflict with each other?
I mean, it's simply an hours in the day problem. The systems around us are all built with the idea that there is someone at home for children during normal working hours. So the example I always give is that the school day does not match the work day. Even though my kids are both in elementary school, I'm still responsible for figuring out what happens to them between the hours of 2:50 and 6 p.m. And I'm very lucky that their public school has a robust after-school program. I still have to pay for it, but it's there. I don't have to take them anywhere. Like, it's at least easy enough. And my job is flexible enough that I can pick them up by 6 p.m. That's unusual to even have that. We don't have the systems that allow you to do both. It is an individual problem in the United States to figure that out. And then there's interruptions all the time. I mean, so if you're a person who doesn't have caretaking responsibilities, you have to go to the doctor sometimes. You get sick sometimes. But if you're a parent or you're someone who has elder care responsibilities, you have all those things, but then also you have to take somebody else to the doctor. You have to prepare if someone else gets sick. So as we were talking about before we started recording, this morning, my older daughter had to get braces. My husband was supposed to take her, and he has taken her to every other orthodontist appointment. He had a work emergency. So I had to take her, which I am, again, so blessed that I could do it. But it means everything else today is completely off kilter and has been crammed into fewer hours before the end of the end of aftercare. And so that just means after they're asleep, there will be more hours. So it's just, there's so many more obstacles to being what Joan Williams, who's a legal and gender scholar, coined the ideal worker. So in short, that's working as if you have no responsibilities outside of work at all for your own wellness and health or life, or for anyone else's wellness and health and life. So they're just fundamentally completely incompatible.
This also, can you talk a little bit about the coupling, why we've coupled health insurance with work? Because I think that a lot of people think that that's maybe a good thing, or.
No, I actually think it leads to this sort of all or nothing system, because you need to work enough hours to get the health insurance. And so I think we're actually missing out on a great deal of brain power that could be harnessed if parents could have more flexibility. But because we all need to be working a certain number of hours to get benefits, that leads to this sort of all or nothing situation. It goes back to sort of American individualism. Other countries, our peer nations, think that it is a primary role of the government to provide healthcare for its citizens. We don't think that. And I don't know that we will ever think that in my lifetime. I hope we will, because I think you cannot, I mean, and a detail that I think about all the time, which was in Elizabeth Warren's first book that she wrote in 2004 with her daughter. It's called The Two Income Trap. And the biggest reason for bankruptcy is medical expenses. And I just think that that's unnecessary. I mean, there's no reason it should be like that, but it's just a series of policy choices that we have made in this country.
I think also it's, so as a person who offers health insurance, or I'm not actually on the health insurance that I offer. I'm on my partner's health insurance, but we're beholden to, our daughter has complex medical needs, and even though he sometimes, I'm not going to comment on whether he likes his job or not, but we've talked a lot about in couples therapy, like, oh, you have to stay there because we would be lost without your health insurance. And I think that that's sort of like, as an employer, I would never want somebody to stay because they felt like they had to because of health insurance. I mean, we have these like sort of one precious life. And I guess it's like easy for me to say from my position of privilege that we could find another job, but the stress of having to make sure that we have a particular amount of coverage is not unreal, if that makes sense.
Oh, no, I think all the time about, we can't quantify the amount of stress that parents have because they don't have paid parental leave. Like worrying about having to go back to the job sooner than you feel comfortable with, worrying about losing the job because there is not a lot of protection around around taking leave, if it is extended anywhere past what is, federally mandated, that we don't even know how much extra stress that's causing people. Whereas, in other, I get notes from international readers all the time who are just like, I feel sorry for you. Because they just find it so inhumane. They can't imagine having children under these circumstances.
So I think, like, to kind of wrap up, I wanted to talk about two more things, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Parental burnout, I think, is a huge thing that prior to having a baby, I didn't really understand. And I think acknowledging it and labeling it has been really helpful for me. But I was wondering if you could define what parental burnout is and how kind of the pandemic may have affected it and why talking about it might be helpful for some people.
So, there's a colloquial way to talk about it, which I think is helpful, but then it is a clinical diagnosis. And the sort of quick and dirty way to explain it is like you have a loss of joy in your parenting role. The things that used to make you happy as a parent no longer do. You have an exhaustion that doesn't go away no matter how much rest you get. And I think we are simply being asked to do too much. I think it was most glaring, obviously, from, let's say, March to September 2020. But I think there was no chance to recover from that period. So I think things, and especially if you're anyone in your family is medically vulnerable, that period probably is still ongoing, but there was never, I think actually a lot in my own life about how things are much easier now for my family than they were in 2020. Hands down, I'm so grateful. Every time I drop my kids off at school, I like want to kiss the steps. Like, just thank you. Thank you for educating my children. I was so bad at it. Like, so certainly, like, I'm not suggesting that things aren't easier for the vast majority of people at this point. But I often feel like I never got a chance to recover from all of that. I never got a break. It was just like, okay, well, now you have more time to work. Cool. So I still feel like I talk to, obviously in my reporting and my personal life, so many parents who just feel like I need a 3-month sabbatical from life, at least some life, but like some responsibility that I have. I don't even know what it like, if it's work or if it's, making dinner every day. I don't know what it is. Like, there's just the litany of responsibility that is never ending. Is, I think, harder to bear now than it was before 2020, just because we had this period of very extreme intensity, where all of our villages just disappeared, and that took a lot out of us, in a way that I don't think we can even know. And that certainly there's been sort of no recovery period. So
I think that was really highlighted through reading your book, the acknowledgement of how hard it is and how I haven't even started to grapple with how difficult it was, because during it, we just had to keep going, at any cost. I think at the end of the book, you kind of write about how one of the most damaging parts of American motherhood is that if we express anything besides perfect love, I think is the term you use for our children, we're somehow damaging, we're not good mothers, we're failures. And I wanted to talk about, kind of end the conversation with how you end the book with why do you think it's kind of not serving us to only acknowledge our happy feelings or our good feelings or our quote unquote perfect love for our kids and being a mother?
Yeah, I think because it seems like when you become a mother, you are sort of put in some different category of human who's not allowed the full range of normal human emotion, because about everything in our lives, we are truly ambivalent. We have conflicting feelings, about our spouses, about our parents. But because we have put mothers in this different moral category and we hold them to different moral standards, we don't allow them to have that full spectrum of human emotions. And again, it's just not realistic. We're still people. If I can curse on your podcast, I always joke, I'm like, I'm the same asshole. I am the same asshole as I was before I became a mother. Certainly, I have become more patient. There's things that I don't show my children, but in my own mind, same person, and I do think we feel bad about that to an extent that is making our lives harder, because I can't tell you how many women I talk to who express the emotion of feeling bad about feeling bad.
It's a quote I have on my list here.
Yeah. And so
it just feels so true.
Yes, because I think we've all felt that, where it's like, you have a negative thought about your kids, or you just can't take it that day. And then you feel so bad about having felt that. And so if we can just remove that extra layer of feeling bad, that would be amazing, I think, for all of us.
I also think, I think another thing, not to like add to things that you've said in the book, but about noticing how we're feeling. And then I think you end the book with some hopeful actions that you feel like could be achievable. Can you just briefly talk about what you have hope for?
Sure. I actually think we're moving forward politically. I think it doesn't feel that way because, there's still no real childcare system. Paid leave on the federal level hasn't happened yet, but there feels like there's energy towards that. And there are more and more people who are talking about it, who are fighting for it. And politics is slow. It always has been slow. But when you look at the way politicians were talking about these things in the 90s and even in the early aughts, they wouldn't say any of those things now. It was so much more negative. Not in the book, but in a column I wrote in the past year, I'd found this quote where John Boehner, who ultimately became Speaker of the House, he calls paid parental leave just another yuppie entitlement. And I just don't think any politician, no matter how conservative, would say that anymore because it's unpopular. So I do think we're moving forward in that way. I think workplaces are moving forward because they realize that to retain talent, and not just female talent, they need to give flexibility in some ways. Is it perfect? No. Is there still discrimination? 100%. But I do think the attitude is moving forward. Where I think we are in the sort of worst place, and my column today is about that, is culturally, especially in heterosexual partnerships. Women are still in, cis hetero partnerships doing so much more than men. And I just don't know how we're going to move forward on gender roles. I think we need to stop we're going to continue to have this conversation, but I want to see two dudes on a podcast talking about how they're going to help their wives, about how they're going to show up for their children. And you just don't see that. I'm sure it's somewhere. There's so many podcasts, but it's unusual. It is so unusual. And at some point, we just can't be the ones who are continuing to shapeshift and change. I mean, it just always feels like women and mothers are the ones expected to fix it, and to change and to do more and to agitate and to be the ones organizing. And it's yes, and we also need dads to do it way more than they're doing it. And the reason I'm not super optimistic about that is only because they have it so good. The statistic I say in my piece today, it's by the numbers were crunched by an economist named Misty Hagenes, and she used to work for the Census Bureau, and now she's an academic. And she found that women are doing an extra month of unpaid labor, and dads have an extra month of leisure. We are subsidizing their leisure. And if I had an extra month of leisure, I wouldn't want to give that up either. But they need to see that their partners are dying inside and want to do something about that. And I can't, and I just, it's such a intimate micro level thing. Everybody's got to be working it out in their own relationship. And, my husband and I have evolved on this over time. I think because we started our parental lives with me freelance. And so it was fair in that scenario for me to do more domestic work because I worked less. I worked fewer hours. And the real conflicts started, I think, when I started working, as many hours as he did. And then it's just a math problem that is very hard to solve. And to his credit, he has stepped up, in many, many ways. But it's something that it just requires such constant negotiation. And I am not suggesting that it's easy, because the easiest thing to do is to fall back on gender roles, right? It's hard. It is very hard. And so I am sort of, weirdly, the other two things are sort of easier. Does that make sense? Because it's not sort of day in, day out. It's like policy.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I think it's also through reading your book. When I think about my role in the household, there are so many implicit biases that I naturally fall into, just because having an argument or a fight about them, or a discussion, is a lot of work. It also brings up so many sort of ingrained patterns. And I think I don't always want to have that conversation, but I think, again, going back to, so the book is screaming on the inside, the unsustainability of American motherhood, but this pattern that we're in right now is not sustainable. I'm losing my mind.
I know.
And
I mean, and I think
I know, you know.
I mean, I do think part of it too is like, once my kids are now almost 7 and 10. And so it's easier. It's just easier. It's still hard, but it's less challenging. And so I think often when people are out of the woods, they are moving on with their lives, and they don't reach back and try to make change for the next group of people coming, which is not to blame anybody, because again, they're exhausted. Like, it's just another thing to add to the list, right? And so but if we want an explanation for why things are so slow to change, it all goes back to sort of the burnout that so many of us feel.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica, for taking the time in your busy schedule to talk to me. And I hope everybody enjoyed the conversation. If you want to feel seen, pick up Screaming on the Inside, or check out Jessica's column. I'll put a link to the one that came out today that we spoke about for people. But no, thank you for being an advocate for everybody. I think that what really got me was the real importance of noticing how I'm feeling, and those feeling like it's hard because it is hard. And that felt really just, I don't know, the acknowledgement of how difficult life is somehow makes it, I don't know, not better, but just myself able to keep going. So thanks.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Take care.